So we're on the air. Hey, I wanted to welcome our professionals, DC Greer, Kristen DeProspero, and Reggie Smith, all of whom are going to help Michael and I to understand some of the ins and outs of helping our educators get their funding and some of the things they've been seeing with the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act. There's a lot of information that is coming down on our educators, and we're hoping to be able to help with the help of a fine set of panelists here. So, Michael, go ahead and take it away from your side, and I'll just be back here being quiet.
Hey, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. I think I actually mispronounced Kristen's name the first time I saw her too. Yeah, Kristen DeProspero.
You probably did it for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. I still mispronounce it. So don't worry about it, guys.
Well, what a great crew. I appreciate you all joining in and having a conversation about funding and education. It's so critical today. There's so many things that are going on that are still confusing. Here in Knoxville, we just had a superintendent of schools say that they're going to open schools up in the fall. I think that's wonderful. I think we should open the schools up, but he gave an option. He said, you have to choose before school starts. You're either going to go to school full-time or you're going to be at home going to school full-time. You can't swap anywhere in the year. So I think there's an awful lot of confusion about what's going to happen in the schools coming up next year. I think there's a lot of confusion about hybrid schools, 2 days in school, 2 days at home. The parents are probably pulling their hair out, wondering, how am I going to have my jobs? How am I going to keep my jobs when they call everybody back to work? How much is it going to cost me? These are all the questions that we're faced with as we start to see schools getting this enormous amount of money being funded back at us. So what I'd like to do is open it up the floor. Kristen, if you'd like to start, you're welcome to do that. And let's talk about what funding is available today from federal government, federal grants, state grants, anything else out there that we should know about. And then I want to bring DC in and talk a little bit about another option, which I think is tremendous. Would you mind, Kristen?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I actually just returned from a school doing some adoption training, onboarding training in Ohio just this afternoon. I'm up in Pittsburgh right now. Normally I'm in Atlanta, but they are going to a hybrid model. So every county, every city, every state, everyone's trying to figure out how to do this new normal. And this new normal is going to be around for a long time. All of us talking in the industry about how distance learning is going to take off or telemedicine is going to take off. Well, COVID made that happen. So there is a lot of funding available at all of the different levels from at least 26 different federal agencies. But what's important too is to not forget that the local, state, and local funding sources too. So I can actually show you around a couple of things, and I'm going to share my screen. You're going to have to give me permission.
Yeah, everybody should, but that's okay.
Okay, all right.
So I'm going to start with ESSER because now there's ESSER 1, 2, and 3. And there are different levels or different features within that. So let me go to that document.
And the other thing aren't on, would you mind defining ESSER?
Yes, I would not mind. No, I would not mind is the answer. Let me close that and close you guys. So ESSER is the emergency or the elementary and secondary emergency relief fund out of the CARES Act from March 2020. The original one. Then there's ESSER 2, and it talks about this. So again, it's elementary and secondary education relief fund or emergency relief fund. You've got the same thing in higher ed. It's called the HERE for the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And you've got the CRF, which is Coronavirus Relief Fund, which went to the counties. And with every one of these spigots or buckets of funds that are being released in each of these different acts, There are different amounts. You can go look up what the amount is that is coming into your school, whether you're K-12 or higher ed. And you can talk to your federal compliance officers, you can talk to your superintendents, you can talk to everyone about how is this going to apply to you in your classrooms, for those of you that are direct educators on here. But with the ESSER funds, they had been fairly loose in the first round. So if you look in the CARES Act round versus the CRRSA round that happened at the end of the year, and now the ARP round, it's probably easier just to call it ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. But as you know, federal government or government in general, there's a lot of acronyms. Just remember ESSER here, CRF. So there's a lot of activities, but what I did is I highlighted specifically where there's technology funding. So it talks about how planning and coordination during the long-term closures, including how to provide meals to eligible students, but also providing online learning and technology. So what this means is that some portion of these dollars have been made available for you all to spend on technology. Even more specifically, in this different section, it talks about purchasing EdTech. So it can be hardware, software, it could be licenses, it can be video 360 cameras, it could be your platforms to do your video conferences. It could be all sorts of things that are going to help you with your online learning, your e-learning. It could be computers, it could be tablets that go home with the students, and software to lock those tablets down. I can't even tell you how many examples I've heard from parents that I talk to about how their kids understand how to hack. I actually have one today who was telling me her daughter just turned 10, and she could hear when her parents would in the evening do their routine, and her dad would get in the shower. She would go sneak her tablet out of the cubby where they're supposed to be for the rest of the evening and stayed up all night using the tablets. Now, yeah, it was rough, and her grades were going down. They're like, what is she doing? So she was on games trying to earn points. She even figured out how to turn off the Wi-Fi so that when they did the lockdown, it didn't affect her tablet. So when she turned the Wi-Fi back on, she could still access her games. Now, so kids are smart. We were there. We're not as smart as they are now. You know, we did our other things, but it's the encompassing wraparound services that everybody needs to think about: security, safety, not to mention the cybersecurity and how things are getting hit. But in addition to the ESSER funds, I want to do a little practical support here and show everybody a couple of places where they can look for funding and try to decipher what might work for them. So let me click the skip button. So this is where I got this information, the side by side. This was just a few days ago posted, this particular article just on March 22nd, 15 days ago. Not good with math today, but this is at the districtadministrator.com website, and it's a really nice, easy to understand layout of the 3 ESSERs.
Hey, Kristen, is there anything in there that explains the process, how long it takes to fill out the paperwork, or how do you get the money? How do you plan on it?
Yeah, let me tell you, that's also difficult and interesting and different. You know, Mike, I've always talked about how every grant has its own personality, just like individual people. And every one of these funding sources have their own personality, state by state and even county by county. So you can go see how much money is funneling down, but you need to do a little more digging to find out how you specifically apply. You may only have to fill out a little form. You may not have to fill out anything. It may have just been shoved to your budgets. So that's why you want to talk to your superintendents and your title coordinators.
How long does it take for, once you find out where this money is funneling down to, how long does it take once you see that to get it into into the schools?
Well, it's there. It's encumbered. It's sitting there. It's waiting to be grabbed. So you really want to raise your hand. You know, the squeaky wheel is going to get the oil. So make sure that you are talking to those folks and really making a fit about needing these funds for your projects, because it's there, it's sitting there, and it just depends on your administration and if they are proactive at making it easy for everyone to access, or if they've decided who's going to get it. So every district really is going to be a little bit unique, but you can look at your state websites and they typically have an explanation of what form you might need to request these funds. And of course your county, you know, if you have an educational service center, if a BOCES in New York, or, you know, whatever your system is that you have in your state, they can help as well. So unfortunately, it's as if, you know, the clouds opened and the money rained, but it fell in specific buckets and every different area is handling it differently. So there is no, at least for this program, there's no sort of one size fits all answer.
So
But
I'm sorry, go ahead, Kristen.
well, I was going to say, if you let me show you, there are all sorts of other funds as well. We know, for
I was just
example,
going to ask you about that. So
yeah, there's all sorts of other funds. So what we want to show is you can go to a place like eCivis is a place to get, this is a subscription based, you have to log in. So I'm going to log in to my service and I can look there. But also if you happen to be rural, the RHI Information Hub is a fantastic place for funding. They've got it right there on their right there on the online library. It's the first thing, but of course this is really for rural. This is also a good site, this district administrator site. Let me move that. Then you also have tech.ed.gov. So this is a nice little page that the Office of Educational Technology created. So this is digital learning funding, which is another way of talking about EdTech. So there's the CARES Act funding that we talked about, the ESSER, Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, higher ed or HERF. There's the governor, the GIRF, the governor's emergency relief fund, that goes strictly to the governor to distribute, however. And then there's the stabilization fund. But also, there are broadband funds. There are funds coming out from the FCC. There's the standard E-rate program, and then there's additional programs coming out from the FCC. There's the traditional USDA distance learning and telemedicine grant that's about to be released any second. Just talked to them today as well. There's also discretionary funds. So the real point is you need to make sure that you're going to these websites, the RHI Information Hub, which is, by the way, let me hover over that. It's ruralhealthinfo.org. We also at the USDLA have a section for under resources for distance learning funding and grants. And then there's the US Department of Education, which also outlines, let me go up here. So this is under the discretionary funds from the Department of Education for 2021. So it's a forecast. And this one tells you, Michael, the application deadlines. So this one is older, but what we know is these things are going to come out again. So be thinking August timeline for some of these deadlines, July, August, that sort of thing.
I think there's a good lead in at this point to ask Reggie, since we're seeing all these federal grant funds that are focused on distance learning, you know, what benefits are your membership getting from USDLA that allows them to funnel through USDLA, or how does USDLA help these schools to get to these funds?
Well, it's an interesting question, and Kristen really highlighted and really contributed to putting under our distance learning resources areas listing some of these grants and some of these funds, just like the FCC and the broadband. And so what we have found is that it's all grants and funding is, to me, all about the network. And so you have to talk to people, reach out to USDLA. We have members and that reach out to us, and We will partner with organizations, will point you to others. We also have sponsors that are also offering grants and things that can support the technology. And so there are a number of avenues. And matter of fact, right before this webinar, I had to go back in my time machine, and it's a little small one. And I had to find USDLA, and I'm gonna put Arlene, one of our former board members, on notice. We may need to just bring this back. She created a fabulous book dealing with funding source book around distance learning. And so with the pandemic coming back around, it's something that, we'll talk about reinvesting and probably putting those type of products back out there, because my experience through Star Schools grants in the 90s, it was all about partnerships with school systems and reaching out. And Kristen's right. We have state chapters. And so we'll push also to have you connect and collaborate with state chapters, which also maintain their .org status and are legally filed within the state. And so there are state funds, there are federal national funds, Department of Education funds. And so as an association, we have to sit there as the connective tissue to try to connect organizations, people, sponsors, and members to really help them figure out. And one thing, as we talked and I was listening and taking notes from the panel, one of the things that I advise people to do, have a plan, write something down. So just don't go to the well just because there's a pandemic and try to drain that well the first time. Try to get a plan together. What's your 3 or 5 year goal plan in some of those partners and technology refresh, professional development? As an association, we have a professional development committee that's engaged in providing webinars and professional development opportunities. So you do not, and then also talk to your financial people. How are you going to disperse those funds? How are you going to manage those funds? There was a lot of funds that came out for student aid for the CARES Act. I'm a trustee for an institution in New York, Berkeley College, and we received funds, and those funds really had to be directed to the students. And you don't want any waste there, because if you mess that up, you're going to jam yourself up at the state and federal level. So it's about accountability, partnerships, and as an association, that's where we stand, being around, coming up on 35 years next year, being a connective tissues to the members, to sponsors, to who needs cameras, who needs technology, who needs infrastructure, best practices. We have an instructional media selection guide done by Jolly Holden, Westfall, and Gamore that really tells you how to really leverage instructional technology. Which one's for video? When do you use a virtual world? And also you have taken into account assessments. I think that's a big thing that's going to come out of the pandemic as you hear this narrative of kids falling behind. We know that online remote learning shoe doesn't fit everybody, but being around for 35 years, there's an enormous mountain hill of information that shows online and distance education, telemedicine works. And so we are an association that's going to provide that connective tissue, the research background, and really engaging with folks like you, Mike and Dan and DC and Kirsten, to really share the information and connect folks to effectively go after those resources, where they partner with us or our states or our sponsors, and then also really administer and manage those funds and grow what they do. And we have an awards program. We actually recognize people that really look at that. And in our awards program, we look at and ask, in some, what do your financials look like? So it's not about the shiny nickel. We want to see the entire thing.
Yeah, I would add something to that, a couple of things. One is that I always say that grants don't pay for technology. They pay to solve a problem. So you've got to be really clear about what the problem is and how that's going to, help solve those issues. And secondly, like Reggie said, definitely go to the USDLA website and find the content that we have on pursuing these, because your grant readiness, your readiness to pursue these fundings is as important as the application you put in. You've got to make sure you're following all of the guidelines, and you don't have to recreate the wheel. It's already been spelled out. We've got a lot of that guidance already in there. So come to us for help.
Is that accessible as a member or accessible to anybody that wants to go look at the website at USDLA?
Much of it is already accessible, sort of free of charge, without being a member. And we're going to keep adding to that. And then there's going to be behind the wall, behind the subscription information as well.
Well, we talked about federal funding and state funding and Department of Agriculture funding. There's another little trick here that I really kind of like. That's why I asked DC to be a part of this. DC works for a company called Government Leasing. Almost made up a word for you there, DC. I came up with a whole new company.
You did make up a word. Good. But that's typical. I mean, it's expected.
They do some amazing things, and there's an opportunity that a reason I asked DC to be on this webinar was there's an opportunity to kind of fill the gap, and I'll let him explain all this stuff. But as I look at it, some of these grants take a year. Some of them take even longer if you really look at them. Some of the programs that DC has listed on this customer list for me, one of them was the city of San Diego, where they got $9 million for technology. But what this does is allows you to go ahead and file your paperwork. And DC, you're going to say it better than I am. Have your technology a year in advance, and if the program allows you to put that money back into technology that you've got from a lease, then you're a year ahead of your grant. So DC, go ahead and explain it. I'm not in your business, so I'll let you go to the depth of it.
Yeah, let me clean up all of Michael's messed up. Now, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate being part of it. Let me say that our company, Government Capital, only deals, our primary focus is in the public political subdivisions, whether it be city or county, school districts, anything that's an authority, anything that is a taxing authority. And so that, that's where we shine the most. And we, our markets are education, they're fire and rescue, emergency services by and large. But, in any of those markets, the problem is the same. And we can hear it outside the pandemic, and you can hear it even more within the economic situation we're in. And we really need your cameras, Michael, but it's not in our budget. So, and Reggie, you grinning like a mule eating briars over there. You've heard that before. We all hear that, because that's, to Reggie's point, Kristen's point, the financing solves the problem. So once we hear that, then there is a menu. I think that three important people that have not one solution. We're not the only solution to all the problems. It depends on, I believe it depends on recognizing what they want and what is your urgency. Do you have a year to wait? Do you have a year and a half to wait? Do you need it now? A typical timeline from evaluation of their financials to funding is less than 90 days, And so that's a standard. We have a 98.6 success ratio in funding these. The other thing that I hear is that, we've got to make it past this next year or two. Revenues are down, tax revenue is down. So, they've got a budget hurdle to try to purchase and acquire the equipment and technology that they need, but how are we going to get past that hump? So we have some flexible payment options, maybe a reduced payment for your first or second year, and then the principal and interest payments to pick up after the second or even the third year. So, but I think that we all have a resolve to it, and I think it would be neat to work together to find out which one fits our situation the best. So I deal with Light and Fire and Rescue, and they are the Fire Act grants. And one of the questions I have for Kristen and Reggie is that, and I was talking to Michael earlier today, one of the things that I have to be careful with in the fire service is the Fire Act grant. If you have the ability to get financing, then there's several of those grants that will not go to pay off the financing that's in place. And I would like Reggie or Kristen to address that, so that that's important, because you don't want a school or a end user political subdivision to enter into it expecting it to be paid off. But what's interesting about that, if they can enter, if they have the budget wherewithal to enter into a financing that meets their budget, and they can operate their organization, well then they've solved that particular problem. So, but I would like to hear from Kristen and Reggie about the grants, and if they have a financing, can they go to pay off that financing debt?
I will probably defer to Kristen on that one and round it out on just good behaviors to make sure you don't mess it up.
Yeah, that's always important. Thank
Yeah.
you, gentlemen. I think I will take that answer and answer that question. So like I said, every grant has its own personality, just like individual people. I mean, literally a billion people, a billion different grants, a billion different ways to do it. So the thing that we always advise people is to read the guidance over and over and over and over and ask the questions to the grant managers, the people that run the grant program. They welcome questions, typically, they welcome them. I know the USDA SDLT grant, the distance learning and telemedicine grant, they allow you to use a lease to not only cover the entire project, but their match portion. So it helps them spread their match costs out over time. I love the grants that have no match. Those are beautiful, but you want to look at the details. I know the fire grant, the assistance to firefighters grant, has a match portion based on your population of the city that you're in. And it might be 15% or lower, or higher. So you just have to read the guidance and know whether or not that program is going to allow you to use a lease. The other thing that we found is that banks are getting into this a little bit more too. So going to your local bank to help, even sometimes with donations for some of the match. So community involvement, making sure you're talking to all of the community partners and potential partners. This is about everybody working together and trying to lift this up to help increase access to education and healthcare. I mean, that's what this is really about. And these critical services like first responders and those types.
I was sitting here listening to that. I thought I'd have a sip of my University of Georgia water here for DC.
Yeah, I hope you choke.
Who happens to be part of an organization called Louisiana State University.
That's right. Go Tigers.
Is grant any of the grant funds considered to be CapEx expenditures, or are they something separate of that? So if a school had money in CapEx, they could buy the technology, or how does that work, you guys?
And again, it depends on the grant and the program. There are a couple of smaller foundation grants like the Honda Foundation. There's a Wells Fargo grant, and there's a Lowe's grant. Those are all capital. You can do with it what you will. Sometimes a lot of grants will be for salaries or soft costs, and sometimes they'll be for capital, and sometimes they'll have the option for both. Like with these ESSER funds, they were sort of wide open. You pretty much got to do what you needed to do to survive and to get through. They're starting to lock down those restrictions a little bit more now because it was the wild, wild west at some point. But the capital grants are harder to find. So I recommend you go to the USDLA website to look at the grants we've got listed there. You can come to me. We have grant advocacy. There are other groups that have grant advocacy that there's no cost. You just need to help to find these funds because it really, truly is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So we try to help you go through that.
Can we address the elephant in the room called E-rate and
Yes.
have a discussion about, has it smoothed out? Is it still as difficult? Does it still restrict technology in the classroom? Can we have a conversation about that?
The history that you have with this and getting the codex added to the E-rate program is a great legacy, Michael. And I was working with you when you did that.
Right.
And E-rate was my foray 30 years ago into all of this and just trying to figure out how does all of this stuff work. And then in 2014, they took out priority 2 tech monies. And now they're being inundated. They just recently, February 19th was one of the deadlines for questions and comments for the E-rate program for the FCC and USAC. And they were inundated with people saying, please bring that back. We need EdTech dollars to cover priority 2 and hardware. We can't just have network coming in here and not have the stuff to connect it to. And we still have severe shortages and lack and equipment that is dying or dead and old, and it just can't. There has to be a way to fund these programs that isn't necessarily, region by region or based on the tax base, because that just doesn't work. So, not if we want kids to get educated, and if we want people in healthcare to be able to provide services, they've got to have the bandwidth and they've got to have the hardware and software.
Hey, Reggie, isn't that kind of part of what USDLA is or should be doing, I guess, having conversations with the FCC about broadband, as well as the integration of the hardware into the E-rate program?
Yeah, and we've been talking to the FCC. We're actually have a series of policy-related events next month to really cover from broadband. We're talking to the Minority Broadband Initiative, the FCC on the emergency funds, and so that is part of our role in really advocacy, and to be able to take the voice of members and just not only members, but the population at hand to bring those points forward. And we do. We're going to continue to do it and probably do more. As I listen to Kristen talk about some of the capital things that made me cringe sometimes, I see organizations really jam themselves up on the operational side. So on the operational side, some of that capital gets the big dollars to drop in, but then you have to maintain it and pay the maintenance and refresh. And that's where you end up with having a Tamberg camera in 2021, and it may not show up on a Zoom call or something. So some things just get out of date. So you need to put that, really take into account on the operational side, the dollars that's going to continue to maintain and keep that gear going and allow you to really, in your organization's best interest, to show up to the finance side of the house with a plan. You have to have a plan, because you're going to just do. For me, I've seen do more harm than good. You'll have 1 or 2 good years, and then you'll become out of cycle. And so, that's what USDLA is here for, and really advocacy. We're working with the FCC, Minority Broadband Initiative, Department of Education. We did a number of forums for historically Black colleges and addressing finance and talking to some of the CFOs. And so it's a big thing. To me, the money, the pandemic is a terrible thing, but also you have to take into account the dollars and be responsible for the dollars, one for the short term and the long term.
Mhm.
I would add to that adoption and onboarding and training and making that a continuous process, because I'm sure every one of us on this call knows that all too often there's this robust, incredible technology that's dropped off, and there isn't a real good solid adoption and onboarding training put together for using it and understanding how to build it into your curriculum or your workflow if it's telemedicine or other areas. So workflow, adoption, onboarding, training, those are all things to make sure that are not, those operational funds are not left out or discounted. Those are sometimes even more critical than the hardware and capital costs themselves, because we've seen these systems sit in corners or closets, and that's doesn't do anyone any good. So we have that at USDLA. We've got those programs at different vendors and different associations. The local DLA chapters, like Reggie talked about, those are really good. The TRCs, the telehealth resource centers, those are really good. They will help, let's talk about school-based health. That's a huge push, having school-based health and having access to healthcare in where the human is. The children are in the buildings, in the school buildings. Bring the healthcare to them there via telemedicine. So there's more funding. There were just 2 sources that came out for school-based health SBHC funding that just came out not even a week ago. So, and they're typically $100,000, $200,000, and they're typically per year for 3 to 5 years. So make sure you don't miss those if you need to expand school-based health. And mental health, behavioral health,
Yeah.
huge issue right now.
We just had a young man decide that he had been bullied enough in my daughter's community who ended up taking his life. It was very tragic. And I really do believe that if we had had that kind of resource in the school, we might have been able to save that young man. I hate it. I just can't stand that.
Yeah, suicide rates are up. Issues in tribal communities, minority communities, underserved communities. These are all just exponentially more difficult. And, I haven't talked about the research grants from NIH or some of those that are really geared towards higher ed, but that we're now in this new normal, coming back to this, how do we function in the world? There's a lot more attention that needs to go to what do we do now? All of us have faced so many different hardships and difficulties, every single person, some so much more than others. But mental health, behavioral health interventions are going to be funded at a very fast and large pace, to the point where you're going to see some of these funds come out that will come out in the next couple of months and be funded by August, September for the next school year for K-12. So, keep your ears and eyes open, reach out to me, look at the USDLA website, talk to Video 360. These guys are in keeping track of it, and we can help you find it.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in on it, Mike, and definitely, she mentioned Video 360. A lot of the vendors and sponsors like Video 360 are out there helping organizations go track some of this funding and go after that funding. And Mike and Dan were gracious to send a few cameras over for me, and as soon as I get stuff, I give them away. I give them to a hospital, a dentistry clinic, and so so as association, we are here, and also say at the end of the year, have your plans and your quotes and your dollars together, because sometimes at the end of the year, throughout my career, I've been able to get a lot of stuff done right at the end of the fiscal year when people need to obligate funds. And normally it's not $1,000. There's been something that didn't work out, and the ask comes, and it's a pretty big number, but you have to have your stuff together to really get those funds and obligate those funds before a fiscal year ends. And so that's another opportunity to just throw out there and look at government agencies and some of these grants and partner with some of our sponsors to really go after what you want, whether it's, capital or, something that can help in the operational space.
And Reggie, you bring up something that it always has to be data driven, but you also want to make those reviewers cry. Keep that data and be able to explain to people, this is what has happened. This is how these kids were left behind. This is how these folks didn't get their health care. I was on a call yesterday with somebody who is starting a startup for telemedicine, and he talked about his 2 brothers would be alive today if remote patient monitoring services were supported as they need to be, and that one was diabetes and one was a heart attack, and these types of things are completely preventable, just like suicide and some of the other social emotional issues that kids are having to face.
I wanted to address Dr. Arlene Krebs, who is a wonderful friend from a lot of years ago. And I would think that there would be agencies and organizations, not only your sponsors, Reggie, but organizations in the IT world, in the distributor world, in the leasing world that would help fund that kind of a book again, because it was literally the Bible of funding when it came out years ago, and I've never seen anything like it since. I don't know if Arlene is up to do it, but I'm certainly going to put her name out there in front and say, let's go.
But she knows we're talking about her, because she showed up on a webinar I was doing with the broadband. And it was wonderful to see her. I haven't talked to her in a while, but
Yeah.
you know, with Kristen and USDLA, I mean, we have the history to look at something like that, and I'll take that as an action item from this meeting here to really run back to our board to really look at, you know, and talk to our sponsors. I mean, we have some fantastic sponsors like you guys, Yamaha, NC Sarah. There's so many that are as the pandemic rolled across this country and across the globe, we all sat with horror and seeing what was going on and how our technologies and how our expertise and body of knowledge can really help fund what's happening and really put the humankind on a better course when things like this happen.
You know, I've always said
If I
that.
may,
Yeah.
Michael, you know, one, we have such a great brain trust here. I would love dearly if we could put together just a quick document from you guys, and I'll put it up on our site, make it available to everybody. But if you guys can email me afterwards with what you have, we'll put it together and put a page up on our website, just trying to help people out. You know, guide them to where they can go find the funding. I think that's going to be a big help. You know, just a way to follow up with what we're talking about.
Sure.
Then you know, one of the things that's been kind of near and dear to my heart. I've talked to a couple of the codec companies, you know, the Zoom and the Teams, and you know, what is the education technology stuff going to look like after we get back into class? What's going to happen to all the lessons that we've learned from doing this technology as we're doing it now? One of the major things that I think that we need to be thinking about is the creation of digital students, not just supplying the students with technology, but creating digital students that are capable of accepting this information digitally, instructors that are very comfortable with disseminating their classroom plans digitally. And this needs to start in K-5. It needs to start much earlier than what a lot of folks are thinking about. But you know, as you were saying, your 10-year-old can hack your iPad. It's that they know how to do this stuff. What we need to do is getting them focused on doing digital learning as well as they do digital gameplay. So,
you know, that's a good point, because esports and gamification, we know Reggie with Valerie with a Y on our board. She does a lot of focus on that, and we talk a lot about incorporating those things, and that these kids are going to know how to do this stuff, you know, faster than us. Virtual reality, bringing that into the process too. I completely believe that this is, you know, we're leapfrogging and making some advancements that probably wouldn't have happened without COVID. Certainly, people wouldn't, you know, remember, Michael, when people didn't know how to spell video conferencing and we used to just struggle with that discussion, but you know, now everyone knows.
You know, you bring up a good point, and I agree with the digital students. I think that you know, when the pandemic hit, everyone just, not to say anything bad, everyone just jumped on Zoom, and so Zoom took off. But you know, we look at this perspective, and most of our discussion in the last year and a half is telling everyone distance learning, remote learning is broader than just a video discussion. You know, our military here in the United States has been doing live, virtual, and constructive a long time. I worked on a training transformation initiative looking at live, virtual, constructive, you know, how those LMSs are tracking across a virtual environment, tracking live exercises in the 90s. And so a lot of this stuff is not necessarily new, and the field is broad, it's mobile. And then sometimes you may just need to unplug. I'm actually going to take my 9-year-old and we're going to go to Starbucks and get a cake pop. So we're going to unplug from technology for a minute. because mental health is actually is a big piece, which I think as an association we probably haven't addressed properly, and we need to really engage as an industry across our sponsors and members, and as an association and other associations.
You know, you brought back a really good comment, or brought back a good thought process to me anyway. We've been doing this stuff for a long time. I remember when many years ago when we had Laserdisc systems that routed, when you answered a question, it would take you a different route, all the way to you just blew up the Pentagon, or yeah, you saved the world. So we've had it, but we've had it in different technologies. I also have said over the years, necessity is the mother of invention, and that exact comment comes out of the education world, because these guys and ladies who wanted to have technology but couldn't afford a very expensive system would go out and they'd buy little pieces and parts and throw all this stuff together, and out of necessity they were able to build what they needed, but it would fail, and then there it goes into the closet again. DC, I want to come back to you for a second, if you don't mind. What is the process for someone to go through to look at the possibility of getting leasing?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Excuse me, a pretty simple process. Excuse me, pretty simple process. To start with, they can request a financing proposal. It doesn't cost them anything to find out if they would qualify or not. It really doesn't. But if an entity had a need for technology, they could request a financing proposal. Just give me an idea of what they want to do, what they want to buy, and how much is it. And then I will, unless they have specific terms or whatever, then I can give them a generic proposal, and then they can look at the amount and the terms that could be. This is all etched in Jello, because we're trying to find a starting point for them to evaluate the financing option. So, and then it would show payments. A lot of about 80% of our financings have deferred payments into the next budget year or up to 1 year. And the reason I always put a year, because it's always manageable. But if you put a year in there, you know that's going to get into the next budget year. So they need to key in on that. But the most important thing on there is the payment, because if you can't fit the payment into the budget, then nobody's going to get anything. You know, It's just like if you can't fit the payment into your new car, well, you're not going to get anything. It's just a matter of, can you debt service what you want to buy? But it's really not a simple project. It's not it's a very simple project up front. You don't even have to identify your exact vendor. You can just say, we want to get technology. This is an estimated amount, and I'll give them something very budgetary, usually within the same day or the next day. And then, they'll generally call back and say, well, how does this work? And then I can step them through how it works. So it's not a real drawn out process. I understand that different programs, whether it be federal or state, they have different processes and timelines, and I understand that. And financing doesn't fit everybody, and none of the programs we do. But I think collectively, there is an opportunity to take a look at the various forces. And I was going to ask Kristen, if whenever you look at a grant request, when you determine that they're just not going to get it because of whatever criteria you see and what they're searching for, what is your action to them? Do you recommend another person? Do you recommend possibly a financing resource? So what action is taken?
I think she may be on the phone. So we may have to repeat that one.
Reggie, yeah. No, I was just thinking, and it works for me too. If I had a department or an entity that just did not qualify for the financing, I would like to have an outlet for possibly a grant resource. so we can reciprocate, and everybody can benefit from that, or to some degree benefit from that, because I'd rather recommend somebody and help the people out than I would say, nah, I can't help you, I don't know anybody.
Kristen? Raising her
Yes,
hand.
I see that hand.
Yeah, you can recommend me.
That's what I wanted to hear, Chris. Yeah.
Well, I could have said that, for heaven's sake. You didn't have to get off the phone to talk to me, so.
Yeah. And Kristen, are your markets in education? Are you into the emergency services? Where are markets where you would be able to discuss grants with different entities?
Now she may be frozen. There she comes. There she is. Go ahead and ask her that. Did you hear that question, Kristen?
I did. My computer died. It was probably the universe saying, hey, Kristen, don't get too cocky. Shut my computer right down. What was the question?
DC?
No, I was asking that, whenever there should be a possible means that if I find somebody that does not qualify for financing, and is there an opportunity to refer? Because I'd rather refer them to somebody than just to not try to help them at all. I mean, I think we would all take that stance,
Yeah.
And could I could refer them to you? And a lot of mine is in fire and rescue. And you mentioned, we talked about the ACT grant, the AFG grant. Is that something that you would entertain helping someone?
Absolutely. And if I can't help, I have a stable of grant writers and researchers and experts that I've met throughout the years that I could refer them to, because that's what it's all about. All of us connecting.
It is.
Guys, you asked me to come on to this call today. I'll ask you to come on to another call tomorrow for a different community. So absolutely, I will. If I can't help them, I will refer them to a place that they can be helped. I just had office hours for 2 full days where people popped in for 20 minutes and we searched and we looked and we tried to assess what kind of funding would help them. So I'm always open to doing that. That's what makes my world valuable and give me good warm fuzzies.
Yeah, well, it's interesting though, this timeliness of this call, because our company is looking to partner with someone who is grant oriented. That because if you decide there's certain characteristics about a grant that they got one last year, you may not get one for a truck next year. So it's different criteria. That's space, but just picking up on things. But I think together, and same thing with you, if there are entities that are not going to qualify for a grant, then hopefully there would be a means to interact and reciprocate business. And that way, at least we have a couple of opportunities to help our customer rather than saying, oh, we can't help you. And I would welcome the opportunity to do that with you.
Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. That's what makes it all worth it.
We're coming up on the hour here in about 5 or 6 minutes, but I'd like to give you guys each an opportunity to just kind of wrap up, give your thoughts about not only the funding discussion today, but where we can go with getting people the money they need to bring the technology into the school. So we'll start with Kristen and Reggie and then DC, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. So I put one of my emails in the chat, k2prospera.usdla.org, as a board member for the USDLA. So that's one way to reach me. You can reach me through LinkedIn. The money that we talked about today is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's money underneath. I think considering grant readiness and being able to answer what I call the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why of your project, with the why being the most important, because that's what funders care about. What are you going to solve? Why do you need this money? What's the point? So be ready to talk about that problem and do it sooner than later, and try to wrap around your funding request and your budget and get that stuff established so that you're prepared as soon as any of these grants come out. Thank you very much. I see that you're putting that in there, Reggie. So those are my 2 cents. There's more money than ever before. It's not going to stop. You better get yours.
I agree. I think you know, and I'm more cautious on really being fiscally responsible, and also reach out and talk to us. This is a great forum. We've been around this problem for more years than we can count, and so we have fabulous award winners. You can look at those award winners on the site. Reach out to those folks. They have best case where we've actually scrubbed them on their financials, on their assessment for whatever program they're doing. And so we're here as an association.org to help. We have state chapters. We have friends as 3D Video 360, Mike, Dan, and the team here, and board members. So reach out to us. We're pretty easy to find and want to partner and really kind of help transform the world that we know can exist through remote and digital learning.
DC?
Yeah. I would say that that most of the time they don't look for grants or financing every day, and sometimes I think the greatest thing that we can do is educate the end user as to what the possibilities are. And evaluate what their needs are, evaluate the time frame. And that way we drill down and can make a determination, evaluation as to what would be the priority step, and find out what program would fit them best. And I think that's what Kristen and Reggie, that's what our expertise is taking a look at what their need is and then deciding what's the best route to take that would accomplish to get you most or all of what you need so that you can teach kids or put out a fire or whatever it is. And I think to put together a team that can be transparent and work like that, I think would just be a benefit to millions of people out there that are trying to figure it out. One of the things I'd say is, we find a way where there seems to be no way. And a lot of people are trying to find the way and they just don't have a clue as to who to go to, because there's a lot of people out there in the finance and also in grants, that I've heard horror stories about, just like you probably heard horror stories about finance. And, we have to we're operate with integrity and talking to these folks. And I know Kristen and Reggie, you look like you're a pretty decent fellow. According to Michael, but anyway, I think that we all have a heart for this. We all have expertise that we can build on one another. And I would welcome to discuss our partnership with you guys, because we can't finance everything. There are certain things in the fire, Kristen, as you know, equipment like the air tanks and all that good stuff, they're just screaming for help because they're so expensive. So I feel like that if we could maybe have some after conversation, how that might integrate into our system and ours into, to you guys, we could help a lot of people rather than just the one-off on.
Well, before I do a wrap up on all this stuff, Dan, you want to add anything?
Well, no, and I think that DC, Christian, and Reggie have all hit on it. Well, we are better together. A hand is stronger than the fingers. So, that's why we do these webinars. It's, we try to bring as much information out to our customers and our friends as possible, and just make these resources available. By the way, as we were talking on this, I was trying to come up with what my next webinar is going to be, and I think I am going to do one on K-5 and creating the next digital students, digital instructors, digital students. Mm-hmm. And I really, after seeing everything that's going on, I'm just not seeing the emphasis down at that education level. Whereas, secondary and of course higher ed, they get a lot of airtime. But if we're going to make good students, we need to start early. So that's my pitch for the next one.
Good one. First of all, I want to thank everybody, DC, Reggie, Kristen. It's always great to see you guys. You're really good friends, and you're doing wonderful things for education, and I really appreciate it very much. So for Dan and myself and all the panelists, thank you for attending. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll do it again.
Yeah, watch out for the next one.
Thanks.
Good.
Be safe.
Yep. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.